Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
Welcome to ACC Nation. That's Will Ojanen, and that's our special guest, Conor O'Neill, the publisher of, Devils Illustrated and Deacons Illustrated. Man, it's got more stuff going on than you can shake a stick at. And some good opinions on Twitter, by the way, or X, depending on what you want to call it. This week doesn't make any difference, and we're trying to coerce him into coming. I'm trying to coerce him into coming over to Blue Sky sooner rather than later. We'll see whether or not that all pans out. So people are waiting for you, Conor. We're going to be talking about Duke tonight. So we may touch a little bit on some stuff with Wake, but for the most part, let's talk about what's happening with Duke. There's an awful lot to talk about. One of the things I wanted to start out with was this: the players. What we've seen in the past is we have a lot of players on the blue blood teams that are, when we were doing specifically one and dones, it was just a different type of player. But now these players on Duke's team, not only are they smart, I mean, if you listen to these guys and you watch how they play, they're savvy. I mean, it's fun to watch this team. And in the back of my mind, I've just tossed out the one and dones, even though I know that that's probably going to be the case with several of these guys because they're ready for the NBA.
Yeah. I think it might not be fair to say it all starts with Cooper Flag because that probably takes a little bit too much away from Concanipple. And I mean, good Lord, Cooper Flag played against Team USA in Vegas in practice games. Common Malawach was over there playing in real Olympic games.
Right.
Like he was playing in front of 20,000 and playing in, I believe South Sudan played Team USA and they won their country's first Olympic game. It was the first South Sudan team to make an Olympics. But it does kind of start with Cooper and his competitiveness. And I don't know a specific word for it. I might, if you gave me 10 minutes in a dictionary, but his ability to rise to the occasion and his ability to kind of elevate himself and his competitiveness and just the overall compete factor. You stop thinking about him as a freshman. Like we're 3 months into this thing, and I mean, good Lord, he just turned 18 about a month and a week ago. So he's the young pup of this bunch. I think he's the second youngest player in college basketball this year, behind Jaden Quaintance at Arizona State, who's ineligible for the NBA draft. Like Cooper Flag's only eligible by 10 days. But he's a generational talent, and that competitiveness is one of the things that's driven him to be as talented as he is. So yeah, you're spot on there. I mean, they are freshmen, like they're one and dones. I go back to, the two teams that won national championships relying on one and done players. One of them relied on Anthony Davis and a cadre of other guys at Kentucky, and they had some veterans on that team too. The other one was 2015 Duke that started three freshmen and brought Grayson Allen off the bench, but they also had veteran guys too. And that's kind of the key thing to me is you've got to also have some veteran presence. You can't just have a bunch of one and dones and then maybe a sophomore role player and a junior in there. Like you've got to have some older guys that are gonna bring your competitiveness along.
Right. Sometimes it has to be that anchor. It's funny when I watch tape and I watch Cooper and how all of these other players, man, they just seem to work so well together. It's obvious that there's just this passion for the game. They're out there having a good time. And what really blows me away is, besides some injury issues, that this team is really starting to gel now. I don't think that they're anywhere near close to being as good as they're going to be. This strikes me as being a team I'm not going to be surprised at all if they walk away with an NCAA championship this year. They just strike me that way.
Yeah, they're one of the favorites. I think depending on which book you go to, it's either them or Auburn as the front runner right now. I saw something the other day that the odds to make the Final Four, Duke and Auburn were already like minus 120. So
Wow.
you're not even really taking a risk to say either one of those teams is going to be in San Antonio. Um, yeah, it's funny. John Shire was talking about it last night, and he's the way he talks about it kind of makes me leads me down the thought process of like once you're an established elite team that is on a roll like they are with a 15 game winning streak, you really get rolling downhill as far as your team developing because everybody scouts you differently. Like every coach will say they don't scout teams differently, but everybody scouts Duke differently because it's their biggest game on the schedule, especially in the ACC, and it's going to be that way in March and maybe April. Like that's every team's biggest game. It's every team's Super Bowl at this point. You have so many teams in the ACC that are on the bubble and need a big time resume win. Their only carrot out there is beating Duke on a lot of their schedules. But what that also says is like Duke has to adjust and Duke has to rise to the occasion. There's that phrase again with in regard to the whole team instead of just Cooper. They because they get tested in that way, because they get scouted differently than everybody else, because everybody else gets up more to play Duke than they do, say, no offense intended, but Boston College or Miami or Virginia Tech or whoever else in the ACC at the bottom half of the league, then that's kind of the thought process I have when people start trying to say that it's a problem that Duke is not getting tested in ACC games. Like the Duke is going to have this Gonzaga hex on them where they haven't played anybody, not Gonzaga this year, but Gonzaga of years past, where they play this tough non-conference and then they go in the West Coast Conference and go 18-0 or 20-0 and don't get tested, and everybody thinks that's why they lose come March. I don't buy that. I just you're getting everybody's best shot. You're getting guys that are going to have career games because you're who you are, and they're going to get up to play you. And so that's where this team is getting challenged in the way that they need to get challenged, even though it is a pretty shoddy ACC.
Yeah, and let me take the opposite side of that approach, the looking at the ACC from that perspective. Um, One of the things that I see in the ACC, and it also affects football, is that typically you have a team or two that are like cream. They rise to the top, and then there are other teams which are very competitive, but they're not that cream of the crop. And nonetheless, there are teams within the ACC that can give you a solid game. Now, let's be frank about it. Duke is just stacked top to bottom. This is an exceptional team, and if you can beat a team like Duke in the ACC or any conference for that matter, at this point, then you're exceptional. You have pulled the rabbit literally out of the hat. But I think there's enough teams within the ACC that they'll give them a run. They'll give them a decent shake. And I think people need to step back a little bit and say, hey, maybe the ACC isn't having a great season overall. We don't have like 4 or 5 people that are ranked or whatever. UNC's down, blah, blah, blah. But you're still going to get good games out of Clemson and Pitt and Louisville. These teams are there. They're doing fairly well. And it's I think that I don't see them knocking off Duke, but I think that they're competitive enough to give to help Duke sharpen the blade.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's like I think it's there, um, and we'll see. I mean, when it comes down to, tournament time is the great exposer of a lot of things within the ACC. So we'll see how it all plays out there. I've yammered on forever, and Will is a very patient man, but only to a degree. So I'm going to let Will take the ball and run with it.
Mhm. I'll try not to travel with it, but Connor, this team. I think what stands out about this team is it's his defense. I think Ken Palm has it ranked number 3 overall in defense, and they've held, I want to say, like 5 opponents under 50 points, and this is the kind of thing you would see like peak Tony Bennett Virginia do to a lot of opponents. What makes this defense so special this year?
It's maybe I'm a prisoner of the moment because of the game they just played against Carolina and the size advantages they had at every single position, but it's the length. And it's length that you just cannot simulate in a practice and in a walkthrough going up against this team because I don't know of anybody in the country that has a 7'2" guy on the scout team. I guess maybe Florida has that one guy who's like 7'7" or 7'8". Maybe he helps them out if that's the matchup down the road. But God, I mean, there's just no substitute for length. And it's not just the length, it's the way they use the length, and it's the way that they switch 1 through 5. I mean, you're talking, Common Malawach is really valuable as a rim protector, and just him standing under the basket changes trajectories of shots. And you have guys miss shots that they'd normally make because he's in there. He also switches onto the perimeter and guards and doesn't give up straight line drives and doesn't get shot over without contesting shots. Like RJ Davis a couple times couldn't do anything against him last night. And that's the reigning ACC player of the year. So it's the length. It's a lot of other things too. I mean, uh I know it seems like a while ago now because the game Duke just played is always the most important one on their schedule until the next time they play Carolina. But they got all they could handle from Wake Forest and NC State and actually had to go zone. And all of a sudden, they're a capable 2-3 zone team. Like they throw Pat and Gongba down there. Cooper Flagg admitted he'd never played zone in his life, which sounded nuts to me. And then I realized like, yeah, if you have Cooper Flagg on your team, you probably don't have to play zone because he's such a good defender. Like, I'm sure Mount Verde wasn't playing any zone with him. But man, they have so many ways to throw you off defensively and like to round it back into form. I mean, nobody in the rotation is under 6'5". Cooper Flagg at 6'9" moves so fluidly, and his instincts are just off the charts. And he's actually a better offensive player than I thought he would be this year, but he's still a more advanced defensive player than he is with the ball in his hands.
100%. You can just tell the way he moves on the floor. He is such a problem defensively. But you mentioned Malawach a little bit ago. So I mean, you talked about what he can do. He's still a really raw prospect, somebody um who I think there's still a lot of potential in his game. What do you see as like his biggest strength defensively?
Well, he stopped goaltending 2 shots a game because that was the path in November and into December, and we like the improvement where he came from, where he was trying to block every single shot, and it seemed like he did not understand the goaltending rules for college basketball in America, to getting him to understand, hey, go after the ones you can get to, but you need to be a defensive rebounder on the ones you can't, and you can't come from the weak side and block everything. That's just like even though you're 7'2" with a 9'5" standing reach, you can't do that. It's impossible to do. Um, that's that's all there. The other part of it is, I mean, the first 2 months of the year they weren't switching with him. He was kind of in a hedge or a drop. They were keeping him close to the basket because that's where he needed to be effective. And all of a sudden it was the Pitt game in early January that I went into that game thinking it was going to be a really competitive game. Pitt, I think, went in at 12-2 or something like that. They beat Pitt by 29. And part of that was because Common Malawach was switching 1 through 5 and staying in front of Jaland Lowe and Ish Leggett. And those guys didn't beat Duke that night. And then it's kind of like, you know, every player is obviously different, but we went into the season thinking that Common Malawach would have to be Derek Lively. And Derek Lively 2 years ago, I thought was the best defensive player in the ACC. I thought he was robbed of ACC Defensive Player of the Year. He just changed so many things. And ironically enough, it was a game that year against Pitt that all of a sudden this raw 7-footer that hadn't done much of anything to that point for Duke was switching on to the Pitt guards of 2 years ago, and they weren't beating them. So it's just kind of it's come full circle here with Common, and he got better without Malik Brown behind him because he didn't have the safety net. Now they have the safety net of Malik Brown in there, and he's a great defensive player for entirely different reasons other than they both switch now. But yeah, it's pretty incredible to watch up close.
You mentioned earlier just the way this team works, and obviously we know the freshmen, we know Cooper Flag, Conkanoopel, etc. But I think the reason this team is the way it is you have a guy like Sion James who came from Tulane, was the guy basically, and came to Duke. His role was, he's not playing nearly the minutes he was at Tulane, but his contributions are great for this team. What can you tell us about Sion's adjustment to this team?
They struck gold with him. I don't know a better way to put it. He is 6'6", I think 225 or 220, something around there. I don't know if he has 2% body fat. It's ridiculous to look at him. The running joke a few years ago was every time Duke had a game and Trevor Keels was on the TV, Jay Billis would say he looked like an NFL linebacker.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've been waiting for all those jokes all year when it comes to Jay Billis calling games with Sion James on the court. Um, he's really been a stabilizer when you think about what Caleb Foster's role was going to be and how disappointing he's been this year to this point. They're going to need Caleb at some point in the next 2 months. I'm convinced of it. But Sion moving into the starting lineup, being able to be a ball handler, be a 1 through 5 switch guy. Like you don't feel like you have a mismatch even when he gets switched onto a 5 and they're trying to post him up because he's just so sturdy in there and he's able to front the post and move guys out of the way because of his low gravity base and because of his athleticism. I mean, that's like to steal some words out of John's mouth last night. He just makes so many winning plays for you. That's really what this team had. Like from superstar Cooper Flag on down to whoever the last man in the rotation is on whatever night like Pat Gongbo or Isaiah Evans, they all just do so many things that help you win, whether they show up in the box score or not. And Sion is right there at the top of probably if you were to chart all those little like deflections and tips and coming down with loose balls and 50-50 balls, forcing a random jump ball here and there. Like he's got to be at the top for those types of plays.
You mentioned Caleb Foster. Why has he struggled so much this season?
I don't really know what it is. I think I think there was an expectation of what his season would look like, and it hasn't gone to plan. I think there's been some confidence lost. I think, he's in a different role. He started, I think the first 7 games it was either 6 or 7 games. And then Sion moved into the starting lineup, and I think the first game Caleb came off the bench, he had 11 points against Auburn. Um, but it just, I wonder about a guy whose playing time diminishes like that, where his confidence goes to. Um, like I said, that they're bound to need him at some point. Like they'll have a game in the next 2 months where some guards are in foul trouble. They need him to play big minutes in the first half or the second half, whatever it may be. Um, he's it's where you're either going to be sitting there saying we're going to get quotes from John Shire about how great it was that Caleb Foster stayed ready, or we're going to get quotes about a loss. Um, not to put it all on him, but like that's just the way I see things trending.
Jim?
Yeah, let's stray just a little bit, as I always do. You ready? This isn't too far. Cameron and Caden Boozer. So if the name Cameron or Boozer didn't give it away, the full facial heavy duty 5 o'clock shadows on these young men at 7 o'clock in the morning will confirm that they are indeed Carlos Boozer's sons. What do you see them delivering for Duke?
It's kind of there's a little bit of run on twins at Duke. Kyle Filipowski had a twin, Matt, who went to Harvard and was a player for a couple years. I've kind of lost track of where he went. Cooper Flagg has a twin, Ace, who did not reclassify. He was at Mount Verad for the last 2 years, and now he's at a private school in Greensboro Day, and he's going to be playing at Maine next year. Um, but now Duke gets the twins who are actually both legitimate 5-star ACC talents. No offense intended toward Filipowski or Flagg. Um, it is interesting though in the fact that like Caden projects as a multi-year point guard in college basketball. Cameron Boozer may very well be the number one pick in 2026. He's going to be right there with AJ DeBonsa. And there's another name that's crept up there into the conversation with the top three guys. I can't remember who it is who's up there now, but anyway, I mean, Cam, it's also kind of striking and different to me that they're twins and Caden is a 6'3", 6'4" point guard, like lead guard. Cam Boozer's a 6'9" guy. Like Cam Boozer, everything you see Cooper Flagg doing this year is what you should probably envision Cam Boozer doing. Just role wise. I'm not saying they have another generational talent coming in the pipes who was sitting behind the bench last night, but like the roles are going to be very similar because their skill sets are kind of similar. And you got to remember they went up against each other for years on the AAU circuit because they were in the same class. That one of the reasons that Cooper Flagg reclassified is so that Duke could get both of them there and they could both go to Duke. Because if Cooper Flagg stays in his original class, there's no chance that both of them wind up at Duke. They play the same position. They're both ball dominant players. It wouldn't have happened. Um, it's Look, I don't want to come off as a homer. I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying Duke is going to be Duke forever, but the work that John Shire has done in recruiting is kind of something to marvel at. Us at Rivals, we have him, he's in his third season. He's already had 4 recruiting classes to gather talent as Duke's head coach. He's 4 for 4 in getting number 1 classes in Rivals rankings. I mean, it's just it's an absurd level of recruiting that they've hit, and it shows no signs of slowing down, at least at this point.
I'll give you our blessing for being a homer. It's okay, trust me. Everybody does it to some degree anyway, so and that's okay. I don't have any issues with that at all. Still know that you've got a great perspective on everything that's going on, so that's why we have you. I think when you talk about Shire, it's stupendous. I looked at that situation and I'm going like, boy, there's going to be this period where you come off of somebody like Mike Krzyzewski, who is literally a once in a lifetime kind of coach to build a program. Let's make no bones about that. You can either like the man, hate the man, whatever, but you got to respect what he did at Duke. Period. If you don't talk about basketball around me. Um, I looked at that and I thought, well, I don't know how the fans are feeling about this. They seemed a little bit, oh my gosh, we're losing K and something that's solid, and who is this Shire guy? I've never. Oh yeah, he play okay, so he's all right. He may be okay, and then it was sort of like, well, let's see what he does. And I was just thinking to myself, this guy really is set up to do well. Let's see if he pulls it off. And my God, you just laid that out. It's like, I'm not going to call him. He's not at that point yet. He's got to win a couple NCAA titles and stuff. Yeah. He's going to be that dominant force for a longer period of time. But man, it looks to me like he may be taking this team, this program, to a higher level potentially. If I dare say that, I could get burned by people who think that K does no wrong. But I can tell you he does. So
yeah, it's just to kind of steal part of your words there, Jim. I mean, like you said, love or hate K. I would say you can love or hate the way that Duke handled the transition with the farewell tour and everybody in the ACC giving K gifts in his last road trips there, and there was a lot of kissing of the ring, if you will. If you went around the rest of the ACC to 5, 6, 7 programs and asked North Carolina, Miami, Virginia, Syracuse, if well, maybe well, not Louisville, but you get the gist. If you went around and asked those programs, hey, if you had to lay out a transition plan, would you do it this way? What do you think their answer would be? I mean, and look, part of that is part of that is just the way Duke was set up to be able to do it.
mm-hmm.
I guess Virginia or UNC would be the closest ones that would be able to say, yes, we could have done it that way, but based on timing, based on their coaches being who they are, based on Roy Williams did not want to drag something out. He announced his retirement on April Fool's Day, and everybody thought it was a joke. But the way Duke handled
the ploy that was, by the way.
I know. I had forgotten all about it until everybody thought Shams had been hacked about the Luka trade. And it's like, yeah, that's where our minds go.
Yep.
Like when something is that crazy. But the way Duke handled the transition, giving Shire a full year to recruit and say, like, I'm going to be the head coach at Duke. Will you sign up and play for me? And getting the guys he got, Dariq Whitehead, Kyle Filipowski, Derek Lively, Tyrese Proctor. It was the right way to do it. And there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The other part of that is John will never directly say it, but you can read between the tea leaves. You can read between the lines. There were things about Duke's program that needed to change.
Yeah,
like the Final Four run in K's last season with Paolo Banchero, that saved a lot of painful conversation about the end of his tenure because
right.
there was going to be a lot of talk about how much talent he had past 2015 that failed to reach the Final Four. When you think about the Zion team, when you think about Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter, when you think about how bad they were during the COVID years in 20, well, 20 they were good in the tournament that didn't get played, and then in 21 they were bad. They also didn't have a home court advantage in Cameron because nobody was allowed in the place. But that 22 team really saved a lot of the discussion around K. But there were, I don't know if cracks is the correct term, but there were certain things in the foundation that needed to change and that wouldn't have changed if K had stayed the coach because he had been doing things for a certain amount of time a certain way.
Yeah.
But now Duke goes out and schedules home and homes against teams like Arizona and goes on the road and plays a non-conference road game in what I think their fourth or fifth game of the season was at Arizona. Um, One of John's first hires was Rachel Baker, a general manager who could facilitate and manage their NIL situation. His next hire was Jay Lucas, who, unlike dozens of hires previously to Coach K's staff, was not a former Duke player. Like there was I think it went back into the early 2000s or maybe even the 90s where every assistant coach hired was not only a former Duke player, he was a former Duke captain under Coach K. It just got to a point where you're only hiring from within the family. I mean, Jay Lucas is their defensive coordinator, and I just spent 15 minutes telling Will how good their defense is and why their defense is good. It's because Jay Lucas is their defensive coordinator, a large part of that. So there are certain things that John did to modernize and kind of revamp the approach with Duke. This year we've seen it with more of an embrace of the transfer portal. They went out and got three complete difference makers in the portal, and I think they had gotten two in the first 2 years under John, and both of them came in his first year, Jacob Grandison and Ryan Young, which, like, no offense to those guys, but they rank fourth and fifth on the impacts when you measure the transfers that John has brought in 3 years.
I think you've made a superb point here, and we used to sort of harp on the fact that David Cutcliffe, former head football coach, good coach, no doubt about it, made a heck of a difference with Duke's football program.
Mm-hmm.
There also comes a point at which, coaches come in and you build a foundation. And sometimes you're not the guy to put in the HVAC, the plumbing, the electrical, and frame it out.
Yeah.
So, and that's where they were. You look at the programs at Virginia and Miami, and Tony Bennett looked at it more from the perspective of, well, all of this stuff that I've got to do, I don't find this fun anymore. This isn't basketball as I know it. So he got out while he could. Smart move on his part. And I know Virginia fans miss him terribly. Jim Larinaga, there is waking up and going, you know what? Look in the mirror and go, really, things have passed me by. And that is a tough thing for anybody to swallow. I've had that moment in my life where it's just, where you just realize that you're no longer Conor or Will. You are who you are, and things are passing you by. Pass the torch. And I think that that was an exceptionally good thing to happen for Duke, because it's really saved that program and kept it intact. And I think John has done a phenomenal job down there. And, that's also, you have to look at the entire athletic administration and what they have done to support that and to make it happen. So, kudos. And I think every other school, not only in the ACC, but everywhere else, ought to look at that as an example and say, look, sometimes coaches get to that point where stuff is going past, and maybe you're, even though you may be top tier, you may not be best suited to be in this role any longer. So get somebody in with fresh blood, a different perspective, and a better understanding of how things are transitioning with NIL in transfer portal. Will?
Yeah, I don't know if Kay would have gone out to Vegas to play a neutral game like he did against Kansas. Now, I mean, if anything, they're going to MSG, which, by the way, they're playing Illinois and
Yeah.
MSG in a few weeks. That feels like a nod to Coach K.
Duke Duke is always going to have a game in MSG. Like that's one of the things that's not going to change with John. They're always going to play a game in MSG, and they're going to call it Cameron North, and it's going to be uh, a marquee. Like it's not going to be Northwestern or Mississippi State. It's going to be somebody legit every year.
Definitely. We've talked about Cooper Flag a little bit, and you've obviously covered Duke for a little while, and obviously you've seen a lot of freshmen come and go. Where does Cooper Flag rank in terms of the best freshmen you've seen come through Duke?
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, I just told my wife tonight. Actually, he might be the best college basketball player I've seen in person. I'm I'm gonna try to rack my head. I mean, I've seen college basketball for a long time. I grew up a Maryland fan. I've seen Juan Dixon. Like, that's my heart. But he's just so advanced, and I've taken to just when people try to pin down what his best attribute is or what the best thing he does on the court is. There isn't one. He's the last answer to a multiple choice question. He is all of the above. It's never just one thing. I was talking to my dad earlier today, and he was telling me that he thinks rebounding is the best thing he does. And I'm like, okay, that's good. His passing is off the charts. I mean, he is a willing and just spectacular facilitator with the ball in his hands. There was a pass on a fast break early against Carolina. I didn't even realize live because it was going down the court away from me. I didn't realize how good of a pass it was until I was watching highlights today, and he's throwing it like off a defender's thigh close to him, but it's beating the defender on the other side of the lane who's further back toward the basket to hit. It was either Sion or Tyrese Proctor for a layup or a dunk. Just like the wherewithal to be able to throw that type of pass in that situation. I go back to I think I don't know if it was the best play I've seen him make all year, but it was one of the best plays I've seen him make all year. It was a 4 point game, about a minute and a half left against NC State, and NC State had not gone away all night. And Duke has the ball. They're trying to keep him at arm's length. Cooper has 27 points to this juncture of the game. He penetrates left. He draws a double. He throws a pass across the lane to a cutting Pat Gongba, who to that point in the season has scored 28 points. He is not a scorer. He has not been relied on. He missed his senior season with an injury. And
It's
sorry,
going
guys.
it's going around, dude. That's all. The last guest we had on was recovering from COVID, so yeah, the coughing
That's
is going around. So
And I was sick too last week, so
if you need to get some water or something, feel free.
yeah.
Take
Let me
a
just-
take a
yeah,
sip while you can.
we'll stall.
We'll fill the
But no,
fill the
and
blanks
this is
here.
the thing. We've seen so many great freshmen come through Duke, and
Yeah.
and we've seen the hype over Cooper Flag for a couple of years now. If you listen to college basketball stuff,
Mhm.
you've heard the rumblings of him coming, and some of it too is you don't hear very many basketball players come out of the state of Maine.
No, this
It's
is
not
a good
exactly
point.
a hotbed for basketball. And somebody I'm going to talk to, I want to bring up when he comes back, Concanupal, and he's another player, another freshman that's been really, really good for them. I think it's because when Khan's had or when Cooper's had his off nights, he can rely on a Tyrese Proctor
Hmm.
or a Con Canoopel, who are both really good 3-point shooters. And now that we have Connor back, I'm just gonna switch over to Con Canoopel, someone we were just gonna talk about. He's another freshman that we haven't really talked about much, but he's kind of the number two guy for this team and a guy he's a good 3-point shooter. I think he's shooting about 38% from three this season. What can you tell us about Con Canoopel?
He uh he was funny. Ah, I think I drank the water so fast it went down the wrong pipe.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Not good.
I'm not recovering anymore. I think I'm recovered, but I had COVID about a week and a half ago.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Khan Khan is interesting. He made a good first impression on us as media in the Duke Media Day. He came in and was kind of channeling his inner KD and was telling us he's 6'6", even though Duke lists him at 6'7". I don't know if that's a 1 inch difference that means that the NBA is going to draft him as a 6'6" guard instead of being a 6'7" wing. Like, I don't know if that matters all that much, but he was very direct with us. And Duke, the people I talked to at Duke were just like, well, we measure them with shoes on because they're always going to be playing basketball in their shoes.
Okay.
Makes
Oh.
sense to me. The other part of Khan that applies more to basketball is I'm gonna try to get this right. I screwed it up so much in the preseason. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. He is never moving at a pace that's gonna blow anybody away. He's not winning any athleticism battles. Um, he is always under control though, and he is that keeps him poised and keeps when you're poised and you're a leader, even if you're a freshman, everybody else is going to be poised around you. And with him and Cooper, that's part of their skill sets. He just you never get the sense that he's overwhelmed. Um, in the few games that he struggled, you've kind of seen him adjust along the way, and he'll find out other ways to impact winning.
Mhm.
That's where he's just so valuable as a probably a little disrespectful to call a projected lottery pick a Robin to somebody's Batman. But for better or worse, like when you're playing with the projected number one pick, that's kind of the role that you are saddled with.
That's right. Yep. I
Right,
don't
Ken.
think there's any disrespect there at all.
Yeah.
So, um, one thing that I did want to touch on here just a little bit was I was looking at field goal percentages and, stats. Typically, I'm not the guy who gets into the stats, but this is impressive to me. I look at Brown and, when we're talking about field goal percentage, he's shooting 63%. Not bad. Then all of a sudden we go Gungba is at 70%. And then, I thought, okay, well, that's pretty fantastic. That's got to be top end. Maluach, 75%. And I'm going like, this is off the charts crazy. And you've got three guys, and I could have gone on down the list and rolled off some people, some additional people. But the fact that you've got three people cranking out those kind of stats, and then I go down to 3 points, and I got two people there. I've got Evans and Proctor. Evans shooting about 45% of 3-point, and about 39% for Proctor. Again, not half bad. It's like, oh my God, how do I defend this team? It's almost like the offense of Duke right now is just like, where are they missing? Where on the floor are they missing from, and where are they not a threat?
No, it's a pick your poison team. Like you might take away one or two of the things that they want to do with the ball offensively, but they're multifaceted enough and skilled enough to still find two or three other places that they can exploit you. One of the things I found interesting was, Wake Forest held them to 63 points. And it's a season low. They had a couple other things that were either season lows or second worst they've had all year. Um, Cooper Flagg still had, I think, 24. Steve Forbes told us after the game that he was actually kind of happy that they took away his assists because he feels like Cooper first looks for the assists and then gets himself going offensively. Um, but again, he still winds up with 24 points. I think he had 11 of Duke's last 24. So it was more of a takeover late in that game when Duke was down 6 that pushed them over the edge in a road atmosphere in a sellout crowd. Um, yeah, I've kind of just taken the stance that I don't think Duke is going to go 20-0 in the ACC. I think they're going to get tripped up by somebody. It might happen this weekend at Clemson. Like that's a electric atmosphere and that's an old team. Um, they're not going to be wow. I don't think they're going to be wowed in the sense that some of the other ACC teams are when it comes to Duke's length and their explosiveness. Um, I do think when/if Duke loses an ACC game, it's going to be as much or more about what they do wrong than it's going to be about what the other team has done right. They're so good and they're so advanced and they have so many different ways to beat you. They're going to have to beat themselves for you to beat them.
Yeah.
It's going to happen that way. Unless somebody comes out and makes like 20 of 25 three-pointers or something just absolutely absurd. And Notre Dame tried that. They were 14 of 24, and Cooper had 42 points that day.
It's funny you brought up that concept that of they're going to have to beat themselves basically earlier when we in the program, and I was thinking to myself, is there anything that would indicate that's a possibility with the momentum that they have going on now? And I think I got my answer from not only just this answer, but back then too, that pretty much no, unless something like, you run into a team that's more seasoned and can figure some things out. So you talk about Flag, and I definitely want to throw Flag in here as a, rebounding 8 rebounds average per game, which is pretty solid. And Malu Watch is at 6.2. Again, here we have guys that are not only shooting well, but grabbing stuff. But I keep going back to this thing you bring up about Flag's assisting. And it's just like, for me, watching tape on this guy just blows me away because, as you illustrated with that example earlier, his capability of making stuff happen sounds like some kid who has been playing since he's like 2 or 3 years old on out on the streets, and has just got that savvy. As I pointed out, he's not only smart, but he's savvy and knows how to make stuff happen before he goes for those points. So
yeah, you feel like if he was 4 or 5 inches shorter, we'd be talking about him as one of the all-time college basketball point guards.
Yeah,
or at least all-time one and done point guards.
Yeah, he's definitely got point guard mindset going on there. He just makes stuff happen, and I like to see that. That's the type of player that I think is going to do well in the NBA. We've always asked people this, and I've asked you before, but things change in life. So I'm just go off I'll go off the rails here again. Will's going like, oh my God, here we go.
Par for the course.
What since you're altering sort of your coverage of things between two teams, and maybe altering the things that you're doing in your life, has your tastes in food changed any? And do you still have that one favorite place that you like to go to, which I have stuck up here in my head, and I want to see whether it's still the same place?
Yeah, if I'm thinking the way you are, favorite place is still Cookout, and Cookout is always open, as I like to say.
And that's the key.
Yeah. Um, a 6:30 game yesterday. I love to get to the arena as early as they'll let me in for those types of games at least.
Mhm.
So I'm there at 3:30. I think I ate my media voucher meal at about 5 o'clock. So I'm driving back to my home. I live about an hour and 10 minutes from Durham. Um, it's like 1 o'clock and I haven't eaten in what, 8 hours. I'm hungry. So I stopped at my staple, the Graham Cookout in North Carolina. It's right. Graham is next to the city where I used to live in Burlington. And man, the only bad thing about it is Cookout makes great milkshakes, and I'm not a fan of getting a milkshake and then trying to eat it on the road because Cookout milkshakes you got to eat with a spoon.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really a Cookout milkshake if you can just drink it through a straw. And I'm not trying to spoon a milkshake in driving 75 miles an hour down the highway. But other than that, yeah, it's always hot. It's always well proportioned. Sometimes at other cookouts they skimp you on the fries a little bit or something like that, or they give you some small chicken tenders. Graham Cookout always gets me right.
Taking good care of you. So,
Yeah.
Hey, Cookout. So you need to be doing some advertising on.
It's one place I didn't get to hit in my last
sites.
trip.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Anything
I've been to a
else?
couple of cookouts, but when I was down there, back in the fall, that was one place I didn't get a chance to go to.
Yeah, you like to hit the fried chicken route when you're in the area. So.
I did go to Bojangles because we don't have any. There's obviously better out there, but as I say, there for somebody who lives in Minnesota, we don't exactly have fried chicken places here.
Yeah, man, I don't know if I could last there. I didn't think of myself as a fried chicken guy like growing up in Maryland, but then it's
And
probably
down.
living down here as long as I have. I don't know if I could live somewhere that didn't have at least a few fried chicken options.
Yeah. I'll tell you, not to disparage any fried chicken places, but I've always found that those random like gas station places, that the neighborhood gas stations,
Mm-hmm.
have some of the best fried chicken if you get in there at the right time. So
Yeah.
just saying.
Yep.
Anyway, always got to put in food here because I'm a bit of a foodie and I like talking food, man. It's like now I'm hungry. All right. Good stuff. Hey, Conor, thank you as always for joining us and talking basketball and a lot of other nonsense. The publisher of Devils Illustrated and Deacons Illustrated. Make sure that you check out all the Blue Devils action on Devils Illustrated. A lot of good stuff and a lot of things to be talking about right now, and keeping an eye for this team and where they're going to be headed, because like I said earlier, I think this team is headed for some spectacular stuff in postseason play. So we'll see how that works out. Thank you, Conor.
Thanks, Conor.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.